Welcome back, fright fiends. Say, who's that behind you? Looks just like a twin. Or double. Note, this story is for adults and contains cursing. A quick reminder before we begin. Please rate the show on Apple or your podcast site of choice, and please like or follow it. It all helps to get it higher up the charts and to grow it. And subscribe to the show's Patreon for great benefits. And don't forget Speeda Games. That's SPIEDA games.com. Use code ATYPICALHORROR, one word, at checkout to receive 20% off your order, or click the link in the show notes to have it automatically applied. Limited time only. There you will find movies, board games, video games, and collectibles at great prices. If you don't see something you want, feel free to reach out via the customer service links and ask. We will be happy to order it for you, or may already have it in stock but not uploaded. There are sales ongoing for our grand opening. And if you live in the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area, we are opening a store at 6560 Backlick Road, Springfield, Virginia, Suite 215. That's 6560 Backlick Road, Springfield, Virginia, Suite 215. Please check the website for details, but we should be open for business within 2 weeks of air date of this episode, and we look forward to hearing from you. Speeda Games is LGBTQIA friendly, as well as being gay-owned, so help support a small business that supports marginalized folks. And if you came here from the link on Speeda, welcome. Thanks for checking out the store and then coming on over here. Now, a quick recap of what this show is all about for new and returning viewers. On this show, I want to tell original horror stories, but I also want to provide a place to talk about the struggles of living and being creative while dealing with ADHD and autism. In other words, an atypical brain. Each episode will have a small segment on that up front, but the story will always be the main part. Alrighty, with that stuff out of the way, let's get to it. In the last 2 episodes, I have talked about representation. Autistic representation, why it matters, and what I have done and want to do better. Last week I said I would try to feature more autistic characters. Well, it didn't take long. You will find one in tonight's tale. I want you to pay close attention as you listen, to Janet, to what makes her different. I want you to think about how this affects the story. How would it have been different if she were neurotypical? Would it have been as good, or worse? I also hope you will put yourself in her shoes, the shoes of an autistic person, for just a bit. I hope you will hear the things she struggles with, the things that make interacting with neurotypical people on a daily basis such a challenge, and think about what that must be like. Are the positive effects enough to outweigh the negative? I will leave that for you to decide. Ago. It's been happening for about a week now. Seeing myself. Not myself. The other me. What do you call it? Doppelganger? Yeah, that's it. Mike Anderson leaned back in the hard Starbucks chair, ran a hand through unkempt, oily hair that looked like it hadn't seen shampoo in days, and regarded Janet Sykes with eyes looking out over bags so dark one could be forgiven for thinking he'd been beaten. Everywhere I go, he's there. I'll be walking down the street, get an odd, skin-crawly feeling. Look back and see his head, my head, in the crowd jamming the sidewalk behind me. Or standing on a street corner. Always that creepy sneer on my face. And always, if I try to catch him, confront him, he slips into the crowd or around a corner and is gone as if he'd never been there at all. Jesus. And that's not all. I have to avoid reflective surfaces. Windows, puddles, especially mirrors. If I look in one, he's there, over my shoulder, leering. I whip around, and he's gone. Mike slumped in his chair as he took a slurp of black coffee, all energy expended. After a moment, he seemed to gather some last reserve, sat up, regarded her with those exhausted eyes, and continued. But that wasn't the real start. Not really. It really began 2 weeks ago, when I first started noticing that my coworkers were different. At first I chalked it up to the craziness of election season, but the more I watched, looked, noticed, the more I saw. By last Monday, a week ago, it was clear that most of the office had been replaced. Replaced? By others. I don't know who they are or what they want, but they're not my teammates. Even the senator has been replaced. By others. I don't know who they are or what they want, but they're not my teammates. Even the senator has been replaced. A Across the table, steaming pumpkin spice latte forgotten in front of her, Janet took in the exhausted thing that had been her friend. She felt horrible for him, wanted to comfort him, but wasn't sure exactly how or what to say. As an autistic person, emotional support was not her strong suit. In fact, people, especially those who didn't know her well, had more than once accused her of being cold or haughty. One ex, a short-term one, had even called her an ice queen. "Figure something out. He needs me. Just be honest." Janet reached across the table and put a hand on one of Mike's, felt its slight tremble. "Mike, I'm so sorry. I'm not sure what I can do to help. Have you maybe thought about a therapist?" Mike yanked his hand out and swiped it through the air in a hard no gesture. "I don't need a shrink. They'll just tell me I'm nuts, put me on drugs or something. I'm not. He's as real, as solid as any other schlub out there, I swear. And the others too. I didn't ask for you to come here so I can cry on your shoulder. I need your gifts." Janet rocked back in her seat, stunned and unsure how to respond. "My gifts? What do you mean? You're so logical, clear-headed, not letting emotions get in the way of your decisions. The way you see patterns where others miss them. If anyone can help me prove this is real and with objectivity, it's you. Please, I can't take this much longer. Jesus, has he had a nervous breakdown or something? Maybe I should help, then at least I can stay close, maybe even convince him to get professional help." Janet leaned forward. "What do you want me to do? How can I help?" "I need you to come to my office, see for yourself. You'll believe. Then we can figure this out, who they are, how to stop them." Janet didn't understand. "I'm sorry, this is a bit much." Panic filled Mike's features. "At least come with me now, see if the doppelganger is still out there. Please, just do that." That sounds dangerous, are you sure?" She didn't really believe in doppelgangers, of course, but she would humor him, for now anyways. "Yes, you'll see him, you'll believe." "Okay, when did you want to start?" "Now, let's just go start walking the streets." "Well, okay, but I can only give you an hour. I have to be back to work at 2. Desperate relief filled Mike's face, emotion so intense Janet thought he might break down into sobs right here in the middle of Starbucks. She just gave a friendly smile in return. "Let's see what happens." They finished their drinks and headed out. As they stepped into the bright afternoon sunshine, Mike grabbed Janet's hand, hard, but not so hard it hurt, and glanced around, frantic fear torturing his already exhausted features. Janet gave his hand a comforting squeeze. He turned to look at her. She smiled. "What's wrong? Did you see him? I thought he always comes from behind." Mike nodded, curls flying. "He does, but I just had to be sure. Come on." He set off at a brisk walk, pulling Janet along behind him. She hurried to catch up before they entered the main flow of traffic down the sidewalk, crowded as most sidewalks in the city were on such an unseasonably hot fall afternoon. That was a good decision because they soon were surrounded by a huge mass of pedestrians heading in all directions, pushing and shoving in a maelstrom of humanity. Had they still been separated with only extended arms holding them close, they'd have been pulled apart in seconds. As it was, they huddled close together, arm in arm like an old-fashioned couple, squeezing their way through. At 5'3", Janet's nose was uncomfortably close to many sweaty armpits, and she was extra sensitive to smells, so between that miasma and the humidity created by so many bodies packed so close together in the heat, she felt like she'd entered the world's nastiest sauna. Nausea hit Janet and squeezed her stomach. This was why she usually tried to stay on the edges of the crowds as much as possible. Mike was oblivious to any of this, just bullying his way through, scanning faces. Janet tugged on his arm. "Mike, can we get out of here? Move to the side? It's nasty and I'm getting sick." He ignored her, not so much as a nod, no change of direction. "Mike!" He stopped, seemed about to acknowledge her. Before he could, he straightened, stiffened, and squeezed her hand tighter. Almost too quiet to hear, he spoke. "He's here." He turned and looked back, anxiously scanning the crowd. "There!" He pointed to a spot well back in the column of people. Surprised to feel a little fear herself, Janet looked where he pointed. She thought she caught a glimpse of red shirt and brown hair, just as Mike had, disappearing into the crowd. "Did you see him? You saw him, right? You had to. He was there." Janet hesitated. She had seen someone, but not his face. She didn't want to say yes and get his hopes up, especially since she didn't think it was real, but also didn't want to say no and send him spiraling. Somehow, she had to thread the needle between the two. "Well, I don't know for sure. I did see a brown-haired man in a red shirt, but he was gone before I got a good look at him." Mike was crestfallen. "Damn, it was him. I know it was." Janet squeezed his shoulder. I'm sure we'll figure out what's going on. Just stay calm. She glanced at her smartwatch. Well, maybe tomorrow we can try again, but I have to get back to work. No, please, he's here somewhere. The frantic wildness in Mike's eyes worried Janet, but there was nothing she could do. She had no choice. Sorry, Mike. How about tomorrow? Same time? Mike frowned. Okay, I guess. See you then. Janet felt terrible for him as she released his hand and slipped into the crowd, pushed her way to the edge, and headed back to her car. Work went by slow as molasses, distracted as Janet was by worries of Mike. She was afraid of what he might do if things got worse. Would he hurt someone? Would he hurt her if she couldn't verify his claims? She didn't want to find out. Janet met Mike for lunch at the same Starbucks and couldn't believe what she saw. He was relaxed and alert, eyes bright and bags under them already fading. His smile was big and genuine. Mike? What? You look a lot better. They embraced. I am. Finally got some sleep last night. That's great. Are you still seeing him? Nope, not at all. Oh, awesome. You really do look a lot better. Thanks. So how was last night? How was work? Janet blew out a breath. You know how it is. Election season. Speeches, debates, town halls. Long hours and little sleep. At least I'm just a staffer. It was a town hall last night, right? Janet was confused. Yeah, you know that. I already told you. Right. Just forgot. Lack of sleep, you know. How did it go? It was good. No major gasps from the esteemed congresswoman. This was said in an exaggerated tone. It was a long-standing joke between them, her esteemed congresswoman and his gentleman of the Senate. She leaned back in her chair, relaxing. Good-sized crowd. Congresswoman Daley is hoping we won over some more voters. Wants to widen our lead even further than it already is. I could have told her even before last night that there probably wouldn't even be any new voters to win over there. Mike smiled. Demo data? You know it. Queen of the patterns right here. It was true. One of the gifts of her neurodivergent brain was the innate ability to spot patterns. Jigsaw puzzles, codes, even in random designs on doors or in carpets, or the marks on her own body, she could see patterns no one else did. And data. If you were an elected official and you wanted to know anything about your constituents as a whole, voting trends, issue affinities, population makeup and changes, anything that could be analyzed and made into easily digestible charts, she was your girl. If you wanted heartfelt speeches that would bring people to tears, better look elsewhere. Janet knew pretty much everything there was to know about how people worked, especially in the aggregate, except how to touch their emotions. That was a foreign concept. So you're sure she'll win? Janet didn't understand. Of course, Mike, as sure as can be. She's way ahead with just 13 days to go, and she's not HRC. But you know all that already. You know something I don't? How's the senator looking? Fine, of course. I just wanted to be sure, that's all. Good. We got this in the back. Don't worry. She stood, stretching her arms. Be right back. Gotta use the little girl's room. Okay, I'll be here. As she finished up washing her hands, Janet's phone rang. Wiping her hands dry with a few quick swipes under the dryer, she pulled it out of her purse. Mike? Hey, Mike. Be out in a moment. In a hurry? What? I just got here. Was running late and just wondering if you were here yet. What? Is this some kind of joke? She hoped it was, but had he sounded different? Less cheerful, more exhausted, more like yesterday? She thought so. Taking a few deep breaths to calm her nerves, Janet unlocked the door, opened it, and stepped out. She walked the short hallway back to the main dining area, and sure enough, the table they'd been at was empty but for her cup. Chills shot up her spine. She looked around the store, and there he was, waiting for a drink. She hurried up to him. Mike, didn't you already have a drink? He turned, then froze when he saw the fear in her eyes. You saw him. He was here, wasn't he? Janet almost said yes, then stopped. His eyes were wild. He looked ready to blow. I don't know. I thought we talked, but I am pretty tired. Maybe I just dozed off and dreamt it. Didn't realize that when I got up to use the restroom, I was also waking up. You don't believe that? You don't believe that? He was here. Mike started looking around at all the people. Janet thought he was getting ready to start accosting people, maybe ask them if they'd seen him earlier. was probably deciding who to start with. Can't have him freaking people out. Got to get him out of here. Now. Janet looked around at the people, all absorbed in their phones, laptops, or conversations, or in ordering and waiting. And the baristas were running ragged right now, barely seeing faces. And how many of them had even been in here a few minutes ago anyways? Customer changeover was pretty rapid. No, Janet didn't think anybody would confirm having seen Mike. She grabbed his arm. Whether he's here or not, doesn't matter. He's not now. Let's just grab our drinks and walk. Look for him out there. Sound good? To her relief, his features softened and he nodded. Yes. A few minutes later, he got his drink and they left. They walked the sidewalks up and down, first one side then the other, then moving to other streets. As they walked, Mike's head was on a swivel, never stopping, always scanning. Janet looked around too, but not with the same fervor, had almost convinced herself that she really had just fallen asleep at her table, waiting for Mike. That whole conversation did seem hazy and indistinct in her memory already. Though in general she accepted and even embraced her differences, it was times like this that Janet wished she weren't so different. Maybe if I could just read people like regular people can, I'd have realized that wasn't Mike and confronted him, held him there until Mike arrived. If that wasn't all just in my head. She shook her head to clear it and focused her attention back out to the street around her. Knew it wouldn't do any good to beat herself up over something she couldn't change, even if she knew it would be hard not to. They spent another hour wandering the streets before deciding to call it, as she had to get back to work analyzing and collating the data from last night's event. Janet hadn't wanted to believe, had insisted to herself that Mike was having a breakdown. She even believed it through the rest of the workday, which went long into the evening. Then what had she just seen? Who had she just seen, looking back at her across the crowd making its way to the subway station? Who but herself? She would know her own face anywhere, even if she saw it only for a few seconds. It's been a long day. I'm just imagining things after all that with Mike. He was so insistent it almost made me want to believe. That's all. It had been a long day. All days were long during this part of the cycle. 12, 13 hours easy, if not longer. She couldn't remember the last time she'd worked an 8-hour day. And yet, it had happened just as Mike had said, the feeling of being watched, then turning, and there it was. Exhausted imaginings, that's all it is. Janet shook her head to clear it and resumed her trek to the station, just ahead on her left. At the dark opening, Janet stopped cold. The crowds were much thinner beyond the station, most people on this block turning in. There, at the end of the block, it stood, her. The same long brown hair, the same horn-rimmed glasses, even the same red blouse, navy slacks, and sensible purse. Janet stared at a duplicate of herself. They locked eyes for a long moment. Then, with a sly smile, the kind Janet used when flirting, the other turned and disappeared around the corner. "No, stop!" Janet shouted, breaking into a run. She'd worn flats today, so no worries about breaking a heel or tripping. In seconds, she reached the corner and turned. Nothing. No sign it had ever been there, ever existed. Heart pounding, breath wheezing from a combination of exertion and fear, Janet looked everywhere. She didn't understand. There was no way it could have disappeared. All the buildings on this block were private offices or apartments requiring badges or swipe keys for entry. No nearby alleys either. It was like it had disappeared into thin air. Or like it had never existed. You're exhausted and your mind is playing tricks on you. Go home and get some rest. Fighting to calm herself, Janet took one last look around, turned, and headed to the station. She spent the entire 30-minute ride and 10-minute walk to her condo studying everybody, looking everywhere, waiting for it to reappear. It never did. Exhausted and ready to collapse after the event she'd helped carry off the previous night, followed by over 12 hours staring at screens and documents and numbers today, Janet let herself into her condo, stepped into the front hall, and closed the door. As she reached to turn on the hall light and drop her keys in the bowl, she froze. Something caught her eye in the mirror, illuminated only by the orange light on the porch coming through the door windows. When she faced it, she saw only herself and the painting on the wall behind her. But for a moment, just a moment, Janet had been sure there was someone else in the mirror, someone walking next to her. That wasn't even possible. The hall wasn't wide enough, even without the entry table on the wall below the mirror. Just some trick of the shadows. Mike must really be getting to me. Get some sleep already. After hanging her purse on its hook and kicking off her shoes, Janet went to the kitchen for a quick bite, then upstairs to get into bed. Janet stripped off her dirty, sweat-clammy clothes and went into the bathroom to brush her teeth and wash her face. Stepping into the dark little room, she flipped on the light. It screamed. Behind her in the mirror was her. Same hair, same body, same birthmark, same face. Except, it wasn't the same, was it? The eyes were blank. The The mouth was stretched in a wide, toothy grin. Throwing her hands over her face, Janet turned away. After a few moments, she opened her eyes, and there was nobody. Not behind her, not in the mirror. She released a breath and grabbed her toothbrush with a shaky hand. Jesus, girl, get it together. Damn you, Mike. After getting in bed, curling up under the weighted blanket that helped her to sleep, Janet lay in the dark for a bit, thinking over what had just happened, convincing herself it couldn't have been real. But her mind's eye kept coming back to that smile. What was there about it? After a few minutes, she got it. Mike had described the smile he had seen on his doppelganger's face as evil, but hers hadn't been. Strange, for sure, but not evil. More like someone who had never smiled before trying it for the first time, after only reading descriptions of the process, without even any illustrations. Strange. Somehow, despite such thoughts, Janet drifted off. One week later, Janet sat in her kitchen wondering if she was going mad, if somehow Mike's madness had spread to her, or, more accurately, been passed on to her, since he seemed fine now and had since the day after their last search. Too fine. Since then, paranoia and fear had built steadily, taking over her life. Since that first time, she had seen her own doppelganger repeatedly, walking down a street, shopping for groceries, in crowds at town halls and speaking events. In reflective surfaces, not every time, but enough to cause her to avoid them with the manic desperation of an abused dog avoiding the hand of its master. Janet leaned her elbows on the island countertop and thought back over the last week. Hadn't she also noticed changes around the office? A few at first, then more and more, just as Mike described. Not everyone, maybe half the office. Mike had said the replacements of others had come before his own doppelganger, a week before he had first seen it, but for her they had been entwined. What did that mean? Was there some schedule that was now so tight that the two were being combined? Though she didn't purposely look for them, Janet couldn't help but notice and track the various daily patterns of office life. When people arrived and left, when they had lunch, whether they went out or bought their own, who socialized with who, that sort of thing. These and other such patterns of physical movement and activity. And, though she was less certain of this, she thought they were changes of personality too, much like she saw in Mike. I have to figure this out, starting tomorrow. Janet ate a small dinner of leftover takeout, went to bed, and slept. The next day, she arrived at work, promptly at 9:55 a.m., as she did every day. Before all this started, she would have expected Jack Williams to enter the office alongside her. Though he sometimes still did, just as often now he would already be there when she arrived, or arrive a few minutes after her. It was the same with many of the others, even Congresswoman Daly. Minor variances in arrival times, leaving times, lunch times, as if they all had knowledge of when they should do these things, but not the years of ingrained habits that caused them to be done precisely, day after day. As she set her bag on her desk, pushing aside the clutter of fast food wrappers and papers to do so, Janet noticed Maggie Clark was already in the next cube, early for her. Hi, Mags, how's it going? A little less traffic than usual? For a moment, Janet didn't think the other woman would respond. Then Maggie blinked and turned to her. Oh, Janet, hi, sorry, guess I was zoned out. Still early, you know. Drive was fine, same traffic as usual. Had there been a slight pause before her name, as if Maggie were remembering it, even though they'd sat next to each other for years? Janet thought so. Maggie seemed distant, hadn't even noticed Janet's use of the nickname she hated. Maybe she was just tired, but even that was out of the norm. Maggie had always been a morning person, happy and chipper even before she'd finished her first mug of coffee. She was also usually a few minutes late due to chronic underestimation of traffic. Most of Janet's other coworkers were the same way, a little different, a little too chipper, too flat, like amazingly sophisticated robots, like Westworld robots, close enough to pass at a glance, but once you got up close, something just wasn't right. Not all her coworkers, some still seemed as they always had, but more each day. Throughout the morning, Janet threw herself into her work, wanting to avoid thinking about these things, hoping she really was just exhausted. Maybe they all were. It was just a few days to the election after all, and they had been working non-stop for months. She didn't really believe that, but felt her continued sanity required paying the idea lip service. At lunch, Janet got up to use the restroom. She didn't like how it felt like everyone had eyes on her as she crossed the room. She felt very exposed. She felt like she had as the new girl in class in 6th grade, making her way to her desk for the first time in front of everyone. She tried to ignore it until she got to the hall. where she stopped outside the bathroom door and released the breath she'd been holding. Janet pushed it open, just an inch or two, but stopped when she heard soft voices within. The rest will be replaced by the election. Janet froze. Holy shit, I'm not crazy. She listened further, keeping an eye out up and down the hall to ensure she wasn't caught by someone rounding either corner. Good, we've been monitoring them for almost a century. Time now to move. Past time. Unless this species acts fast, this planet will be dead soon. Certainly without our intervention it will be. These apes are too selfish, too capricious, and all too willing to blunder to their own deaths. Can't have that. Cutting it close, aren't we? Janet was confused. Who are these things? What do they want with Earth? With me? What are they talking about? Killing ourselves? Nuclear war? Climate change? Likely both. Doesn't matter. We can permanently restore this world to a proper state of balance in a week. Rid it of plastic pollution in 2. Climate change. Sadness at what they had done to the world, and shame for it, filled her, but also anger at the judgment in their voices. Not all of us are selfish. There are plenty of us fighting to survive. We've been doing a lot better since the pandemic. The galactic unitary will not like that. With laughter, the conversation ended. As she heard stall doors opening, Janet stepped into the bathroom, not wanting to be caught snooping. She attempted to keep her face neutral, didn't want them to know she'd heard, hadn't just arrived. Her breath stuck in her throat when she saw who the voices belonged to. Congresswoman Daly and Jenny Michaels, her chief of staff. Them already? How long? As the others turned to leave and saw her, she smiled. Hello, ma'am. Jenny. How's things? They smiled back, big and toothy. Fine. Just discussing tomorrow. Should be a bloodbath. Did the congresswoman's smile take on a hint of evil glee at that, or did Janet just imagine it? Sure will be. 2 more years. She moved past them into a stall, where she threw the door shut and sat down. As soon as she heard them leave, relief crashed through her, and her body shook as she took big whooping breaths, trying to calm herself. Janet spent the next couple of days in a fog of anxiety and terror, suspecting everyone she saw of being a duplicate. She no longer knew who to trust. Who was a real human and who wasn't? Who were they replacing? Were they just replacing government figures and functionaries, or everyone? When she was at work, Janet kept her ears open, hoping to learn more. She was only able to pick up a few bits and pieces, but it seemed they wanted Earth as a staging ground for some kind of invasion or surprise attack, either from or against the galactic unitary, whatever that was. They would save the planet from climate change and other ills caused by humanity, but first had to infiltrate governments all around the world to ensure they would be in charge once that happened. They seemed to prefer subtlety to force. Janet had to laugh, as it would seem the kooky conspiracy theorists were right after all. Aliens were infiltrating the highest levels of society. Only she didn't know if they were actually lizard people or not, but she was going to find out if she could. Janet knew her time would come soon, before the election, and wasn't going to just let it happen. She went to her bedroom closet and pulled out the small revolver hidden there. She had gotten it years ago after she had barely escaped an attempted rape. She had carried it for years, had a permit and everything. It made her feel better until it didn't. After a time, she no longer felt she needed it and put it away. Now it would hopefully save her life. Present. The last 72 hours before the election were ones of mounting dread for Janet. She knew it could happen at any time, her replacement. She couldn't help but wonder how it would happen. Would she be aware, or would it happen without warning? Janet's head and eyes were never still, constantly scanning all directions, desperate as she was to ward off being taken at unawares. She thought she still saw her duplicate sometimes, but not like before. No clear views, only fleeting glimpses. Until sunset. As Janet walked to the train station, she started seeing her duplicate again. Closer each time. Janet wanted to panic, to run, but since it seemed inevitable that it would catch her, decided instead to turn and face it. She ducked into an alley not too far before the train station, a short alley with a blind end and freight entrances to a couple of buildings on the sides. She hurried to the end to put her back to the wall, and even before she turned, she knew. It was there, her duplicate, standing behind her. She wanted to scream, but her vocal cords wouldn't respond. Her throat seemed locked. Janet turned, and indeed she was there, in the flesh. Despite expecting it, Janet couldn't help but jump. Fuck! After a moment, rage replaced fear. Who the hell are you? Why do you want this planet? Why do you want to involve us in your war? It held out an open hand. I can tell you why. It smiled, and it was a warm, sweet smile, just as Janet knew she used all the time. As if it had learned. It hurt her head to hear her own voice from outside her body, and not an electronic facsimile, a real, organic voice, created in vocal cords and transmitted through the air between them. Janet wanted to demand information from it again, but before she could speak, white light surrounded her, blinded her. She threw a hand over her eyes and screamed. For an instant, Janet felt nothing, no sensation, no sense of being. Then the light faded and they were somewhere else. They stood in a small octagonal room with smooth metal walls, floors, and ceiling. The room was brightly lit, but no lights were visible, nor did light seem to be coming from any minute cracks. It just was, as if the room itself emanated it. There were no furnishings, no visible door, and only one window, more of a porthole in one wall. Seeing her notice it, the doppelganger motioned for her to go and look out. Feeling a strange calm, Janet did. As she approached, all she could see was black, and maybe a few white dots. The hair on her arms and neck stood up as she realized what this might mean. When she reached the window and put her face to the glass, her suspicions were confirmed. There, small against the vast firmament surrounding it, but still larger than the moon as she saw it in the night sky, was a bright blue ball speckled with large masses of brown and green, partially obscured by white streaks whipping through the transparent bubble encasing it. Earth! It's Earth! Looking closer, Janet could see Eurasia and Africa amidst the shining blue seas. A hurricane whirled off the coast of Africa. We are orbiting your moon, undetectable to any of your technology. God damn, they really are aliens. I couldn't think what else the truth could be, but I didn't want to believe. The voice was soft, comforting, the same voice she used when comforting her nephews after her sister's divorce, or when helping a friend through a breakup or offering sympathy for the loss of a loved one. Janet turned to face her twin, mind racing. You're aliens. It nodded. The little tilt that was Janet's go-to. You would use that term, yes. You are not alone in this universe, as all who look up from their planets into the starry void when they are still confined to their own sphere hope and fear. Janet couldn't help but notice that last word. Fear? Why should we fear you? Why fear the Galactic Unitary? It was a guess. She didn't actually know they were from the Unitarian. The Galactic Unitary. Those hypocrites preach peace, harmony, and altruism, yet have let untold worlds die simply because of doctrine. Each world must make its own destiny. High-minded fools. You said we were from the Unitary. I heard some friends of yours mention them. If not them, then who? The other stood up tall, pride beaming on her face. We are the Elastrian Empire. We colonize in the name of empire and enlightenment, indeed even as your own ancestors did. But unlike them, we bring not disease, we bring not war, avoiding it at all cost, resorting to it only at the last extremity. Nor do we exterminate, displace, deculture. We assimilate, allowing subject peoples to keep their own traditions, religions, civilizations. In return, they join our empire, in a subordinate role, of course. As slaves. The words tasted bitter in Janet's mouth. The other sighed and shook its head, then spread its hands. Think on it. Your choices are to die free or live under us. Oh, you might save yourselves without our aid, but I wouldn't gamble on it. Not that you have any say in the matter, and even if you did, it is too late. It is time for you to die so I can take your place. But worry not, your remains will be studied by our scientists. Is that what you've been doing? Studying me? Janet fought to control the building rage in her. It nodded. We are telepathic. As I shadowed you this past week, I was absorbing the contents of your mind. I know what you know. I have become you, body and mind. Janet perked up at this, but didn't let it show. Why wait so long? Why am I the last in the office to be replaced? At this point, she was just stringing it along, waiting for the right moment. Of all the people I had to choose from when taking my assignment, your brain was different. Thanks to its odd mix of deficits and strengths, it was hard to get a grasp on. But it matters not, it was still done in time. Janet laughed to herself. Of course, even for a body snatcher, her autistic brain proved a challenge. Without further word, Janet went back to the window. She leaned against the wall and stared out at the small orb that had sustained her through 35 years of life. At the only home she had known, at the only place she thought she'd die, long from now. Sadness swelled within her as she knew she would die here, alone, away from all she knew, all she loved. No, not that easily. It was time. Without turning, she spoke. How do you plan to do it? Kill me. She heard a smile in its reply. It is tradition, if at all possible, to do so with bare hands. It cements the transfer, and it is symbolic, using the victim's own hands to kill them. I tire of talk. It is time. Janet again stared out. She stared and thought of all she might never see, experience again. Sunsets and sunrises, eclipses, soft breezes through her hair, burying her toes in sand, kissing under moonlight. Then peace, acceptance, calmed her. Now. Even as Janet thought this, she heard footsteps coming towards her, hard on the metal floor. In one smooth motion, she turned, slid a hand up the untucked shirt to the holster tucked into her pants at the small of her back. With muscle memory so profound she'd only needed a couple of practice runs to revive the skills she'd built years ago, she drew, turned to face her opponent, and brought the weapon around. Not to point it at the other, but at the window she now faced away from. Shock on its features, her features. It stopped, maybe 5 feet away. Janet smiled. Good. Stay there. You said something earlier that caught my attention. I have become you, body and mind. You really have, haven't you? If your DNA was tested, it would be human. You share my strengths and my weaknesses. You can't just suck the air out of this room and watch me die. If I shoot out this window, you die too, right? Yes. And since I'm not telepathic, you aren't anymore, are you? Won't be calling for help. You'd have to change back to your real form, and I bet that takes time, doesn't it? Evolution's never perfect, is it? No matter how nice the gift, there's always a catch. Her doppelganger's face contorted in Janet's most annoyed look, something her sister always laughed at. Said she looked like a baby about to cry, all scrunched face and squinted eyes. Indeed, but I can use my voice. I bet you won't. If you have to kill me with your own hands, it would be embarrassing to need help, wouldn't it? Would you lose face? Annoyance became anger, and it stepped forward. Enough. That material will never break anyways. Is that so? How about your material? Janet swung the gun around and pointed it at the center of her double's mass, stopping him. I saw the look on your face when I pulled this. You must have known I had it, but you must have thought I wouldn't be strong enough to use it, huh? I thought fear would prevent you. I must admit I was wrong. Perhaps. It launched itself at Janet and slammed into her before she could react. Janet hadn't thought her body could move so fast anymore, but she had been a good athlete in her teens and 20s. As they hit the floor with a bone-jarring thud, she managed to hold on to the gun. They rolled and struggled, striking at each other, grabbing, scratching, kicking. Knees, elbows, and fists all flew and struck with ferocity. The gun fell from her hand and they both scrabbled for it, got their hands on it, and fought for it. Then it went off, shatteringly loud in the small, metal room. Reacting on instinct, Janet let go and threw herself back. After the ringing in her ears and spots in her vision settled a bit, she sat up. The other lay on the floor nearby, a gaping exit wound in its back and a puddle of blood spreading underneath it. I killed it. I actually killed it. What now? She didn't know, but after a moment realized she heard shouts and stomps coming towards the room. It was then she noticed the ring on the right hand, outstretched and flat on the floor. It was a thin gold-colored band with a tiny white light shining from a pinhole on the top. It must have been what it used to teleport, and it would give the game away if they saw it on the corpse. Quick as she could, she scrabbled over, grabbed the hand, slid it off, and put it on her own finger. As an opening appeared in the wall, not like a hidden door sliding open, but as if the very wall was melting open, she stood, heart pounding and mind screaming at what she might see come through. Like the Greys of UFO lore, the beings that came through the opening had gray skin, extremely long and thin limbs, and large heads with huge black eyes. But on the heads were large red crests, like the sails of prehistoric reptiles. They were not naked either, wearing blue flight suit-like garments. Long, thin tails protruded from their ears. They were bipedal, but their unshod feet had only 3 large toes, while their hands had 6 fingers and a thumb each. The lead one began chittering in a strange bird call-like language, before pausing after a moment. When it resumed, it was in English. My apologies, Bestseller Orga. In my haste, I forgot that you do not understand us after making the change. Not without much concentration, anyways. I will speak to you in the tongue of your target. It would seem she snuck a weapon aboard you. You struggled and overcame her, yes? Oh shit, better make this good. Have to convince them quick before they ask something too specific, like if I know their names. That is correct, leader. I should have ended her with my own hands, but in the struggle her weapon went off, killing her. My apologies. It could not have been avoided. Are you able to continue your mission as directed? Despite the inhuman features, the empty eyes, Janet still felt it regarded her with the look she would have given someone if she were testing them, trying to discover if they spoke the truth. Here goes nothing. Yes, leader, I am ready. This planet will be subjugated to the Imperium soon. Long live Elastria. There was a long pause as it digested this, eyes never leaving her face. Oh God, I'm going to die, aren't I? Long live Illustria. Return to the planet. Time is short. Yes, leader. Janet couldn't believe she had fooled them that easily, and thought maybe the leader was toying with her, sending her back as some kind of game, knowing it could kill her at any time. Then she remembered what the duplicate had said. Her mind was difficult to penetrate, to read. Maybe they just couldn't be sure and didn't want to risk setting back their timetable for a mistake. Why one more staffer mattered that much she didn't know and didn't care. She wasn't staying here any longer either way. Remembering what she'd seen the other do, guessing at the rest, she raised the hand with the ring up in front of her, palm in, then thought of home. The bright light covered her again, and again for a moment there was nothing. Then, darkness. Opening her eyes, she saw she stood in her dark kitchen. Oh, thank God, it worked. What now? Now she would be the infiltrator, take on the role of her erstwhile replacement. Watch, listen, learn. And when they went public and took over, she would go underground, use her knowledge to aid whatever resistance there might be, or to create one if there wasn't any. These creeps will find that Earthlings won't just accept slavery with quiet acquiescence. They'll fight, and maybe someday they will win their freedom. Epilogue. On election day, Janet sat with her boss and teammates watching the returns come in. It was no contest for either the esteemed Congresswoman or the gentleman of the Senate. After the opponent's concession, as the Congresswoman strode to the podium to give her victory speech, Mike called Janet full of enthusiasm. "We did it! DC, here we come!" "Yes," she responded. "Congratulations! DC is ours. And then the world. Long live the Empire. Long live the Empire." That's it for tonight. Has anyone you know been a little off lately? Might want to pay a little extra attention, just to be safe.